In this video, I'll show how to make the beautiful Umebachi kikkō pattern. The Umebachi was going to be one of the patterns in Book 3, but because it didn't lend itself to the diamond-shaped kumiko arrangement in the book, I decided to leave it out. However, now through YouTube, we all get a chance to tackle this very challenging hexagonal pattern. Before trying the Umebachi though, I'd advise that you have a go at a few of the simpler hexagonal patterns in Book 3 first. As you can see in the diagram, the Umebachi jigumi comprises sets of 3 mitsu-kude three-way joints, and this is where the difficulty lies. All kumiko have a mitsuki of 3 mm and a mikomi of 12 mm. The main pitch is 65 mm, and the secondary pitch between mitsu-kude joints in each set is 11.5 mm. The first step is to make up a story stick. Because all of the mitsu-kude joints are interconnected with mitsu-kude joints in the pattern pieces, accuracy is absolutely critical. Place marks with a pitch of 65 mm, then place marks at a pitch of 11.5 mm on each side of the main pitch marks, as shown in the photo. The additional marks on the story stick are for the pattern pieces and should be ignored at this stage. From the story stick, mark a master A type and a master B type kumiko, exactly as was done in the other hexagonal patterns I've shown. Beginning with the A type kumiko, mark 9 kumiko from the master kumiko for a total of 10. Make sure all are firmly against the end stop. As always, for accuracy, I like to place a sacrificial kumiko against the side support. Begin cutting the joints as normal. Here I felt the saw was slightly dull, so I decided to replace the blade. Back to cutting, and it's amazing the difference a sharp saw blade makes. Mark and cut the other edge of each of the joints. This is no different from any of the other hexagonal patterns I've shown. The only difference is that instead of single joints, the mitsu-kude are in groups of 3. Because the joints are very close to each other, be extra careful when marking and also cutting, so the pieces between joints don't break off. Also be careful when removing the waste. Flip the kumiko around and mark and cut the kumiko at the opposing 60-degree angle. Again, this is no different from the other hexagonal patterns. Now cut 6 B-type kumiko. Exactly the same process. That completes the jigumi kumiko, and you can clearly see the mitsu-kude joints in sets of 3. The next step is to mark and cut the pieces that make up the hexagrams at each main jigumi joint. The mitsu-kude joints are in pairs and the pitch is the same 11.5 mm as the jigumi joints. You'll notice in the diagram that the ends of the hexagram pieces are 11.5 mm and 16.7 mm from their adjacent joints. Therefore, we can use the same story stick, and all we need to do is add that 16.7 mm mark. Here you can see the story stick with the 3 11.5 mm marks for the jigumi kumiko and the additional 16.7 mm mark for one end of the hexagram. We only cut 2 joints, so place clear pencil marks showing the joints to be cut. The next process is exactly the same. Transfer the story stick marks to 2 type A and 1 type B master kumiko and transfer the pencil marks showing the joints to be cut. Cut the type A and type B kumiko as normal. Here we have the type A jigumi kumiko, type B jigumi kumiko, type B hexagram kumiko, and one group of type A hexagram kumiko. It's now time to begin assembling. There's no glue at this stage. Assemble only one group of type A kumiko and the type B kumiko. Before the other group of A kumiko, we need to assemble the type B hexagram kumiko. This is a type B hexagram kumiko, and you can see the 2 marks showing the ends. Lay the piece flat and place a pencil mark at the 2 end marks as shown. Make sure you place the marks on the correct face, otherwise one end will be much longer than the other, and you'll know very quickly if you've marked the wrong face. The ends have to be trimmed down to those 2 pencil marks on the 30-degree jig. This is the 30-degree jig and the pencil mark. Flip the piece over and trim down to the mark. Trim down until the pencil line can barely be seen. Trim a second piece and both pieces should be exactly the same length. Without glue, insert those 2 pieces vertically next to the type B jigumi kumiko. Continue until all pieces are in. It's now time for the other type A jigumi kumiko and some glue. Inserting the main diagonal kumiko can be a bit awkward, so take your time and don't rush, otherwise things could snap. Because there are so many interconnecting joints quite close to each other, it's best to make sure the joints aren't too tight when marking and cutting. This may result in a few small gaps in the joints, But this is only natural when cutting pieces this detailed and complex by hand, so don't stress out if the odd gap appears. Minor gaps are certainly preferable to snapped kumiko. A good way to check marking and cutting accuracy is to have a look along the diagonals. If they're straight, your accuracy is okay. The next step is to trim and insert the Type A hexagram kumiko from the top. These are trimmed on the 30-degree jig in the same way as the Type B hexagram kumiko. Again, with these pieces, make sure you place the pencil marks on the correct face. One end should form a close fit with the B kumiko inserted earlier. Continue until all Type A hexagram kumiko have been inserted from the top, and add some extra glue to the edge pieces on both sides. There are a number of different ways to approach the hexagrams at the top and bottom, but here I decided to insert the A pieces after the Skakel is attached, as I believe this is a better way of getting a tight fit with the Skakel. This though is entirely your preference, and completing the hexagrams and cutting them in half before attaching that Skakel will also work. Now flip the piece over and insert the A pieces from the back to complete each of the hexagrams. And if your marking and trimming has been accurate, there should be a tight fit at each of the 6 hexagram points. Again, remember to add some extra glue on the side pieces. Once all pieces are in and the glue has dried thoroughly, it's time to cut the piece to size. This process is no different from any of the other hexagonal pieces I've covered. The piece is cut to size, and the next step is to attach the Skakel. This is exactly the same as all the other hexagonal pattern videos. These miter clamps are very handy pieces of kit and greatly speed up the process. When the glue has dried thoroughly, I cut and insert splines to reinforce the miter joints. Strong bulldog clips are also handy to ensure tight-fitting splines. When the glue has dried, it's time to finish off the top and bottom hexagrams. Remove and glue the type B pieces if necessary, then trim, glue and insert the type A pieces from the front. Then flip the piece over and insert the type A pieces from the back. That completes all the hexagrams, and in many of the major kumiko pieces in Japan, this is as far as it goes. And you can see that by themselves the hexagrams make a very attractive pattern. But here we'll take the next step and add more pattern pieces. Between each of the hexagram points, we'll add 3 asanoha pieces. The diagram shows 17.3 millimeters, but there will be considerable variation, so this is only a rough guide. These pieces join in the centre in the same way as a standard hexagonal asanoha, but the other end is cut to a 60-degree jaguchi joint. On thinner pieces, I would cut these on the 30-degree jaguchi jig with a warikebiki, but trying to cut 3mm kumiko at 30 degrees with a warikebiki would take forever. I show a more workable jig for these pieces in Book 2 and also in an Instagram post, and I'll add a link to that below. For this piece though, I decided to tackle this in a similar way to cutting a jaguchi joint for normal shoji, and I explain this in my exercise part 2 video. I'll add a link to that video below. First, I mark a line on both sides with a kebiki. I then establish the curve with my kumiko saw. I begin cutting in that curve at an estimated 30 degrees. Once I've established the cut, I bring up a guide with a 30-degree angled face to check my cutting angle. I finish the cut to halfway, then flip the 4 kumiko over and repeat on the other side. Then with another kebiki set at about 19 or 20 millimeters, I cut the asanoha pieces to length. Cleanly cut jaguchi joints, and with more than 100 to cut, this method certainly saves time. It does, however, require confidence with a handsaw. Trim the non-jaguchi joint end to length on the 60-degree jig in the same way that I explained in the hexagonal asanoha coaster video, and insert the 3 pieces between the hexagram points. Tight-fitting asanoha pieces will close up any gaps that may have opened up between the ends of the hexagram pieces. As with other hexagonal patterns, half pieces are needed to finish off the top and bottom. And other than the jaguchi joint, this is no different from the process I explained towards the end of part 2 of the Kaori Asanoha video. And you'll need to tape all of the pieces against the Skakel to ensure a gap-free fit. Once the final piece is in, the pattern is completed, and it's just a matter of letting the glue dry, removing the spline protrusions and cleaning up the edges and the front and back. And that completes the stunning Umebachi kikkō. This is probably one of the more difficult hexagonal patterns, requiring multiple mitsu-kude joints and extreme accuracy, but it is well worth the challenge. Thanks for watching, and I hope that you'll give this pattern a go.